Russia says it's fighting back against a new Ukrainian attack in the country's Kursk region. Ukrainian troops broke across the border in a surprise incursion in August with the aim of seizing a chunk of territory which could provide Kiev with an important bargaining chip in potential peace talks. Well, on Sunday, Moscow said its forces were beating back the Ukrainians, but some reports from Russian military bloggers suggested the Russian side had come under heavy pressure, while Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said Russian and North Korean troops had suffered heavy losses. The assault comes at a critical juncture in the nearly 3-year conflict, with both sides seeking to strengthen their negotiating hand ahead of Donald Trump's return to the White House on January 20. Well, joining us now to get a sense of what's happening in Kursk, we're joined by France 24's chief foreign editor, Robert Parsons. Hi, Rob. What do we know about what's going on in Kursk, and how significant is this offensive?
Well, as ever, the picture is pretty foggy at the moment. We don't have a lot of clear information. As you say, the Russians have admitted that there has been a counterattack, although we don't know precisely where the counterattack or counterattacks are taking place. We know at least one is taking place in a northeasterly direction from the town of Sunja towards a village called Balshaya Soldatskaya. But there have been reports that there are attacks elsewhere as well. The Ukrainians, for their part, are saying absolutely nothing at this stage, beyond a couple of remarks by, for instance, Andriy Yermak, the chief of staff, presidential chief of staff, who said good news from the Kursk region. Russia was getting what it deserved, but nothing specific. But this is typical from the Ukrainian side in order to avoid giving superfluous information during attack for security reasons. They tend not to say very much. So we're getting most of our information from what you referred to a moment or two ago, Russian military bloggers or Ukrainian military bloggers who say that there has been some progress by the Ukrainian side, but very difficult to measure exactly how much. If this turns out to be a serious counterattack, it will be embarrassing for the Russians. Whether or not it'll be enough to offset their own attacks, the pressure they've been putting on the Ukrainians over the last 2 or 3 months in the Kursk region, remains to be seen. But it's embarrassing nevertheless. The situation has changed in Kursk, it has to be said, over the last few months. Russia, from being on the defensive up until about the autumn, has been on the offensive since the autumn, and has been pushing the Ukrainians back to the point now where the Ukraine is occupying approximately 55% of their territory they occupied at the peak of their incursion into Russian territory. But as you say, this is all about trying to position themselves, both sides, Russians and Ukrainians, for what comes next, particularly in the United States.
Well, Ukraine's Kursk operation was quite controversial at the time, even in Ukraine when it was first launched, some saying that this stretched Ukrainian troops too thin at a time when they couldn't afford to do that. Yeah. 5 months later, how are we looking now?
Yeah, you're right. It was very controversial at the time. There was a lot of criticism, even from within Ukraine, about the decision to press ahead with the incursion, for the simple reason that Ukraine was already under pressure, particularly in the Donetsk area of the front, from Russian forces, steadily eroding at Ukrainian positions. And the argument was, what sense does it make to send valuable troops, including some of Ukraine's best trained troops, to the Kursk region instead of keeping them in the Donetsk region and pushing back against the Russian advances? The argument was quite simple, that by putting the troops there, they would suck Russian troops away from Donetsk and make it harder for them to press home their offensive there. Plus, it would give a morale boost to the Ukrainian side, which has spent 6-7 months at that stage under constant Russian attack. Where are we then 5 months later? Seen from a Ukrainian perspective, I think by and large they can feel reasonably satisfied with what they've got, because the Russians have been forced to transfer a lot of troops away from the Donetsk area, to the point where Russian casualties in the Kursk region have been very heavy. 38,000 casualties, according to the Ukrainian side, Russian casualties since August. That suggests that the presence there is very big, which in turn suggests the Russians have been forced to transfer a lot of troops. On the other hand, Russia continues to advance in Donetsk region. So it's a moot question whether or not opening that front there has really had a big effect on Russia's ability to execute its military operations in Donetsk.
Well, as you say, the Ukrainians in the east are under extreme pressure in Donetsk, and Ukraine is still very concerned about Donald Trump coming into the White House this month.
Yeah, I mean, very, very concerned, as indeed are the Russians to some extent. Both sides are jockeying for position. The Russians have been pressing very hard in the Donetsk area because they too sense that 2025 could be a critical year. The Ukrainians are trying to cling on to as much territory as they possibly can, both in Kursk and in the rest of the front, down to Donetsk, Zaporizhia and places like that. The Ukrainian position appears to be weak in some respects because the Russians have been pressing forward at a faster rate than they have been any time since 2022. But to set that in perspective, in the last year, Russia has taken control of about 4,000 square kilometers of Ukrainian territory. That might sound a lot, but it's about a little bit more than the size of Luxembourg. So to put it in perspective, that doesn't really amount to an awful lot when you consider that since the start of this conflict, at least according to the Ukrainian side, Russia has suffered 800,000 casualties. That is a colossal loss of manpower. Western estimates aren't far behind. And not only that, they've suffered huge casualties of losses of equipment, tanks, artillery systems, armored personnel carriers. So that's putting a lot of strain on the Russian economy at the same time, and growing concerns in Russia that this could be a crunch year for the Russian economy. So, for both sides, 2025 is shaping up to be a critical year. And with Donald Trump coming into power, Keith Kellogg, his new envoy, will be already beginning to look at the opportunities for starting off peace negotiations. He says that by the end of 2025, he thinks it's possible to get a peace deal. Not many people at this stage agree with him, but certainly the pressure is there on both Ukraine and Russia.